Earlier, you had mentioned that there were some limits on, speaking of China and Russia, on how China and Russia could cooperate. What are some of those things that, they might want to do, but they don't have the ability to?
I think there's a number of things where I'm not sure that I'm the best expert on this, but when people talk about, you can have the yuan as the new international currency. There's obvious limits on that, on the use of the renminbi as the international currency. There's just simple steps that the CCP is not going to take that would be necessary to for the yuan to actually replace the dollar. It's like so far away from becoming that. That it's the idea itself right now is still considered absurd by many. So there's simply certain things that if you're an authoritarian country with little international trust, like with little trust internationally put in your domestic institutions, that are harder to do. For which you need to have a functional legal system, a functional rule of law for others to actually trust you, to put their trust in you, that it's not going to be completely politicized. But other than that, again, I do feel that China and Russia are mainly bound together by their mutual dislike of the West. And my point here is not to say that the fact that they are mostly bound by that makes this alliance, friendship, bloc, whatever you want to call it, irrelevant. Like, you can achieve a lot just running on that mutual having a mutual enemy. You can achieve a lot, and you're willing to give the other side a lot simply going by that. So the point that I usually emphasize is just because there is no 100% trust between China and Russia doesn't mean, again, that you can pry China away from Russia and can, get China to side with you against Russia. That's just not going to happen. The way that the CCP looks at this is like very much you go against your principal enemy, and China's principal enemy is the US and not Russia.
Well, I think one of the things that China is particularly terrified about that has come about because of Russia's invasion is, how Zelensky has been, really sticking it to the UN, saying, kick Russia off of the Security Council. It's absurd that they're on the Security Council. And if you don't, just dissolve yourself because you're not doing anything. And, Russia has been kicked off the Human Rights Council. China also sits on the Human Rights Council, is also on the Security Council. This is a conversation they do not want happening. They don't want anyone talking about the idea that one of the countries on the Security Council can be removed.
Absolutely, because they've come to a point where they have, they have fairly good control over the UN system simply by being able to prevent any meaningful action with veto, and by, using other structures such as the Human Rights Council to prevent criticism of its own human rights record, or to even hijack it to get praise. Like when you have the country reviews, you always have this absurd situation where China gets so many other countries to praise its human rights records, and then make suggestions such as improve your, tighten your anti-terrorism work, which is basically, another country saying to China, crack down harder on the Uyghurs. So it's in a situation where it has a pretty good control over UN structures, and where it succeeded in making a lot of the organizations at the UN quite useless in doing their job. I don't think they've, rendered it completely useless, but they've definitely watered it down quite a bit. So seeing the tide turn on that is, of course, viewed as a huge threat on the gains that China has made on that front.
Here's something I've been wondering about. When Biden was running for president, he was saying he would work with America's allies, particularly allies in Europe. And this was kind of in the framework of doing something to counter the Chinese Communist Party. Do you see that having happened?
Yes, to a degree. Like, you have a lot more coordination mechanisms where both sides of the Atlantic come together to discuss, China. The current the current war in Ukraine, Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, has certainly also actually strengthened the transatlantic alliance and has brought them more closely together. So I think there's always room for improvement. And I often criticize my own government, the German government, for having been way too much focused on engaging China and on making economic gains. I think there are definitely parts parts in the US, like, certain businesses, certain lobby groups that actually are a little too German for my liking, and trying to push the US government in that direction. But by and large, I guess there has been progress on working together. Those things are hard. Making progress on international cooperation is hard. So of course I am perpetually disappointed, but I also don't want to pretend that nothing has happened, because that would also be wrong. Like, there has been significant progress. It's more a question of, is it going to be enough, and is it going to be fast enough for the challenge that we're facing?
Could you give us any specifics? I'm just curious.
I mean, the US and Europe, they meet very regularly. They have a ton of working groups on different topics, such as, trade and technology. They have all those mechanisms where they meet and where they coordinate. I'm usually not part of those conversations, so I can't give you details on what they're actually talking about beyond what's being released. But again, progress has been quite big, at least from the outside, compared to what you had before in terms of lack of coordination, lack of talking about this. I think there has been some progress made in getting Europeans more interested in Taiwan. Whereas before, it wasn't really on the radar of most European countries. And I think that has changed quite substantially. And there's definitely more coordination between the US and European countries on Taiwan, any, security issues in the Taiwan Strait.
Do you think Russia's invasion of Ukraine has done anything to raise concerns about Taiwan, that China could do the same thing?
A complex issue. It's certainly raised in Europe. It's not something that's not discussed. And then you have a lot of people with very strong opinions on this. Like, some people will immediately scream that you can't compare Taiwan to Ukraine, whereas some people are saying, well, actually, we underestimated Russia on Ukraine. Maybe we should stop underestimating China's ambitions on Taiwan. So those two issues have definitely been linked. My personal take is, yes, people should, it's good that the current war has raised, I guess, Europe's attention level. There's differences in Taiwan and how an invasion of Taiwan and Ukraine would work. Taiwan is not super easy to invade. There are some limitations on what you can do. It's, I think, objectively harder than invading by land to have this, invasion of Taiwan. However, I do think currently people in Beijing are watching and they're adjusting their strategies. They're probably, going to be adjusting how they approach urban warfare, because they're going to assume that Taiwan is understandably going to, improve its strategies on urban warfare, learning from Ukraine. I don't know if it's super helpful for the line that NATO and especially the US has taken to draw this line in the sand and distinguish between NATO and non-NATO countries. They've basically drawn a line in the sand saying, we will defend NATO countries. We will not directly defend. We will not go to war for Ukraine. I do think this distinction between NATO and non-NATO countries is probably also registered somewhere in Beijing. I do think people in Beijing are probably registering the immense reluctance of NATO to go to war with a nuclear power. They knew that before. But it's currently in action. So I think the current war is definitely, I think, sending some signs to Beijing that might encourage it. but also some discouraging aspects. Like, even if you think, like, Putin probably thought that you can take a country in 1 or 2 weeks, this can go very, very wrong. So in any case, I don't think Ukraine and Taiwan are directly comparable, but I do think it's very important not to commit the same mistake again that we did with Ukraine, that just because we think something is irrational, that the other side also thinks an invasion is irrational. Because people might just have different standards by which they evaluate the pros and cons of taking such a big step.